Go.Compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. At Go.Compare, we are pleased to be partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign, recognising the individuals who are going the extra mile at grassroots rugby clubs across Great Britain. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to nominate a grassroots hero who could win £5,000 for their club, as well as hints and tips from our insurance experts at Go.Compare.
Right, everybody, it's been a little while, but we are delighted to welcome you back to the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. A quick reintroduction. I'm the Telegraph's rugby reporter, Ben Coles, joined as ever by senior rugby writer Charlie Morgan. Hi, Charlie.
I've missed you, Colesy.
Oh, and also joined by the Telegraph rugby reporter Charles Richardson. We're back, Charles. Please say hello to everybody.
Hello. Yes, I've missed everybody as well. And to quote Andy Tate, the Red Devils Manchester United viral sensation from about a decade ago, guess who's back?
Wow.
Yeah,
that's effective.
I haven't been practicing that at home.
People are now paying attention, and that's very exciting. We're not only back, we're also in the Telegraph's very swish new podcast studio, which we spent the morning busily decorating, full of rugby bits from our respective homes. Well, that's a bit of a lie because, Charles, it's mainly from your home. So can you just explain, for the people not watching on YouTube, what exactly is in the room? Give us a vivid description.
So we've got lots of rugby books here, but I think the best few bits are Charlie Morgan's Wimbledon RFC shirt that you can see on the table. And then we also have a bit of a shameless plug. I wrote a piece earlier in the year about a trip to Bayonne where I fell in love with the place and accidentally was able to plunder the club boutique, I would say, without paying for anything. Completely authorised, I should say. And you see a lot of the stuff in the studio here. We've got a ball, we've got a beret. I think there's a neckerchief somewhere. Yes, behind Charlie, there's a neckerchief. And there's also a Racing 92 espresso cup that I'm drinking an espresso out of right now. That wasn't stolen.
It does feel like we've walked into the Bayonne club shop. Like we're kind of surrounded
Tony
by
Pulis, where's the club shop?
Authorised plunder.
Hi, Tony.
Authorised plunder, that was nice.
Yeah.
Now, Charlie, you have rushed back to Telegraph Towers from Jersey, where you've been spending some time with the Springboks, and we're going to hear about that trip a little later. But can you just first of all tell us about your flight out to Jersey yesterday?
For a third time. It was so embarrassing that I'd forgotten that I told you about it the first time and then told you about it the second time. Yeah, so I was walking down the plane, 20E, I think I was, so middle seat, and you obviously get an idea of who you sat next to as you're walking down and what sort of area you're going to be in, don't you? And it was either going to be Cheslin Colby or Sia Khaleesi. It turned out to be Sia Khaleesi on my right and Andre Esterhuizen on my left. I had a sneak preview because Willy Leroux, Jasper Wiese and Franco Mostert were all sort of waiting around me to board the flight. But yeah, really, really nice surprise to be sat where I was sat.
They must have an extra leg room.
They were struggling. I was absolutely fine.
Sure.
You were the middle seat between Khaleesi and Esterhuizen, who aren't small. So that must have been.
I tried not to nause them too much on the way over, but did sort of warn them that I would be interviewing them later. So, yeah.
But it's a short flight, isn't it, to Jersey? They must have been relieved. They'd be like, it's only half an hour, and then we're safe.
Yeah.
Excellent stuff. Well, now, our big interview in this episode will be with the England senior assistant coach, Richard Wigglesworth, to give him his new title, and he spoke to our deputy rugby correspondent Dan Schofield during England's training camp in Girona last week. It's been a while since we spoke about England, and we're going to get into it shortly in the next section. But, Charles, what did you make in particular of how Wigglesworth and England have spoken about this week in York during the Six Nations, which seems to have been this huge kind of dividing point, and I keep calling it York Week, and it sounds like I'm referring to something on Bake Off, but I'm not. It seems to be this kind of line in the sand for England. Yeah,
massively. A massive reset. Wigglesworth and Borthwick, the grand old Dukes of York, seemingly. And
very good.
I mean, what a peripeteia for England in that Six Nations campaign. After two, there was the victory over Italy, and then a sort of another win over Wales, and then a really, really drab loss.
Call it a loss. Sort of a moral loss.
We could call it a moral loss to Wales at home, but and then a really disappointing performance in Edinburgh at Murrayfield, and then a flick of the switch, and they're playing great attacking rugby against Ireland, and they've continued that against France, admittedly as a loss, and then continued that onto the New Zealand tour with this much more expansive, much more sort of creative, adventurous style of play. Now, really, which we're going to come on to, just need to start getting ahead on the scoreboard, don't they? It's all been very nice, and it's all been very entertaining, and it's been very promising with loads of potential. But I think now, hopefully, there might be another York. Maybe Girona is the Girona from 2 weeks ago. They were in Girona. Sorry, last week they were in Girona. Maybe that can be the next York of, okay, lads, we can play nice rugby, but now we need to start winning matches.
Yeah. We'll talk a bit more about England and New Zealand in our next section. Let's get into that right now.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. As a proud sponsor of the WRU, we believe in the importance of grassroots rugby. That begins with the people who are going the extra mile for their local clubs, on and off the pitch. That's why we're partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign. From volunteers to groundsmen, referees to coaches, we want to celebrate the people who are really making a difference and reward them with £5,000 for their club to improve the grassroots game. If you know someone who deserves to be rewarded, we want to hear from you. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to find out more.
Okay, so England get their campaign off against New Zealand this week, who they faced twice in the summer, as well as playing Japan. We didn't get a chance to speak about that. We haven't spoken about England since France, actually. Charlie, what did we see in those games against New Zealand over the summer that suggested progress? I feel like when we've spoken about it since, every time we've brought the games up, we've said missed opportunity. Should have won at least one of them, possibly should have won two. So
Yeah.
how do you feel about them now?
Well, I guess the fact that two close losses in New Zealand is being treated as a missed opportunity constitutes progress, right? Because previously they would be sort of maybe even relieved at the end of a long sort of Northern Hemisphere season to get that close. But I feel like their defence was a big plus point. Their blitz really rattled New Zealand when that could have been something. I mean, conceding just 40 points across 2 games. If you're doing, you're snapping your hand off if you're offered that before. If you're Steve Borthwick, now the problem is clearly how much continuity can they have off the back of that with Felix Jones not being there anymore and Joe Alab sort of taking over that defence and him sort of suggesting that I don't think there are going to be system changes, if only because those players are so invested and so they just relish defending that way, and it's become such an identifiable part of their game. But how do they build on that? I think they'll be frustrated. There are a few kinks in the line out, maybe, and a little bit of trouble, sort of certainly a first phase attack, just getting impetus with that and moving the ball off the back of that.
Just going back to the D, do you think Slade is key to this whole thing? Do you think that can they do it without him? What's
been really interesting is that Alex Zozowski, every time somebody's mentioned Alex Zozowski, what we've heard is that Saracens have changed the way they defended as well. And Zozowski himself spoke really well after the Sale game. The Saracens beat Sale when he was talking about how we've changed the way we defend, and without, he didn't say without the Vunipolas explicitly, but without the Vunipolas now they are less focused on the collision and sort of those wrestly slowing players up in the tackle, and they're more about sort of relentless line speed and really sort of smothering players with smothering attacks. With repeat sets of a really rapid line speed. So that fits well. But to answer your question, I think Slade is very important, and that 50-minute releasing him for that sort of contentious 50-minute spell for Exeter against Harlequins really sort of suggested that, didn't it?
It's Charlie's hinted it there. Charles, it's not been maybe the quiet kind of steady summer that England were hoping for. I mean, we've got to talk about that, don't we? Because those are two massively significant departures if you think about the kind of reputations that they both came into England with in terms of Aled Walters and Felix Jones from their work with South Africa previously.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I think everyone's, this has been written and spoken about now lots, and the England coaches have been on the record talking about it, that it was a blow. I don't think anyone's going to suggest otherwise. Felix Jones, one of the sort of most promising up-and-coming coaches in Test rugby, and Aled Walters' proven track record at the very highest level of international strength and conditioning. But the show must go on. Teams have won World Cups without Felix Jones and without Aled Walters beforehand. Teams have won Six Nations and Grand Slams without those two beforehand. There's always another cab off the rank, whether that is Joe Alab and whether that is Aled Walters' replacement, whoever that is, which remains to be seen. We shall see. Only time will tell. We obviously all hope it is. But there is another one ready to step in, and at the end of the day, it's the players on the field who are executing what the coaches are telling them to do. So yes, a massive, massive loss, but I think there is a sort of real onus on the players to sort of continue what was built in New Zealand and what was built in the Six Nations and make sure that this is a successful autumn. I think it would be too easy if they were to lose to New Zealand, if they were to lose to South Africa, to say that the changing coaches is an excuse. I think they are that squad, from what we've seen of New Zealand and what we saw of New Zealand in the summer, that squad with the still 4 coaches who are surviving from that tour, that squad with those 4 coaches is still good enough to beat New Zealand on Saturday. So I think it would be too easy to use that as an excuse, I think.
On the flip side, having had 2 tight losses to New Zealand in New Zealand, they really need to win this on Saturday, don't they, at Twickenham? Because I think 3 losses in a row, especially 3 tight losses in a row, and you're really asking questions, aren't you, Charlie, about kind of top 2 inches, can you close out games? To repeat the same errors would be a real sign of concern, I feel like.
Yep, I think 2 things. I think that two wins over the autumn is an underwhelming return, and I think they're in danger of, maybe I've said and written this before, I think they're in danger of being a bit of a nearly team, in that they even going 15-6 up against South Africa in the World Cup semi-final with 10 minutes to go, winning position in Lyon, winning position in those 2 New Zealand tests, and I don't think they scored a point in the last half hour of either of those. So why are they not getting over the line? They need to identify that and put that right with strong finishes in all 4 games if possible.
Just feel like it would lift the mood a bit as well, like post Ireland, like having that kind of run of narrow defeats, and I know there's kind of individual reasons, Charles, for those coaching departures, but at the same time, like it's not the kind of stability that we hope that this era of England under Steve Borthwick would have, isn't it? It's kind of a throwback to the Eddie Jones, like chopping and changing assistants, which we always kind of pointed fingers at a bit. It does feel like they need this.
I think that's fair. I think that after Ireland and even after France, in all honesty, I think that public opinion was really high, really buoyant. The public mood was really positive towards England. I don't necessarily think it's gone negative, but I think now there is a certain sort of mystique, mystery and apprehension about England at this current point. I think people are basically in the scenario of, okay, you've got a lot of credit in the bank here from what you've done. Admittedly, there's not 3 losses on the bounce, because obviously they beat Japan, but 3 losses against Tier 1 nations on the bounce. This is your proving ground now. The autumn's your proving ground. Okay, what's happened has happened. I think people would be willing to forgive that if they saw still good performances and positivity in the autumn. I think it's a bit of a make or break sort of fork in the road here for Borthwick, I think, and the whole squad and the whole of the coaching team, because I think if they do have an underwhelming autumn, i.e. win 2 from 4, or even, God forbid, worse than 2 from 4, with the state of Australia, with the state of sort of Australia and Japan at the minute, then I think public sentiment the public mood could darken and become a little bit more negative quite quickly.
Does it feel it's not quite as bad as, because that feeling, I really felt that after the Scotland loss, so actually during York week. But so I don't think it's quite that bad. I don't think the build-up is quite that bad, because there was a lot to be optimistic about against New Zealand and certainly against France, as you mentioned. But they really need a win.
Yeah, they do. And one assistant coach who is very much still there and is now in this senior role and seems incredibly important to England is Richard Wigglesworth. Now seems like a good time to hear Dan's chat with him in Girona. So let's hear how that conversation went.
I know there's no such thing as the perfect game in rugby, but is that as close to your vision of how you want England to attack that Ireland performance?
Yeah, I mean, there'd be loads in it that we could do way better. But from the life and energy about us and the desire to go and score and beat people and make line breaks, that was where the standard that we set in that game. So we want to never dip below that. We want to push that on from an accuracy point of view, from subtle changes that you always have to make depending on personnel, depending on opposition, depending on little evolutions in the game. So yeah, we want to push on from there.
What does a really good attacking performance look like to you? How much is it a sight test versus data? And obviously you want to get be on the right end of the result, but is it I don't know, is it something you judge with your eyes or you look at in...
Yeah, mine would be a big sight test. Yeah, we obviously have in highest level of anything now, there is loads of data. I would look at that after the sight test, after I've looked at it both live, but after I've looked at it on the computer to see what it looked like from a skill and a structure point of view, rather than what the data then comes after, and does it support or does it throw up anything that you maybe have missed. So I would definitely go off the eye test and the feel of what it was, and then bring in the stats afterwards to aid. Right, is this do they back up what I've seen, or is there something that I might need to dig into?
And are there any sort of key metrics you really target in individual games, whether that's ruck speed or is that...
Yeah, we chase speed like everyone else. We might measure it in a different way. For our nines, we'll measure the reload speed of them touching the ball to it leaving. We're trying to improve our contact skills. Like, we know that there are some teams that be ahead of us in that area, and anywhere where all the teams are ahead of us, we try and close gaps. So that'll be a focus for us, because better contact skills means you get better carries, means you get more offloads, means you get a quicker ball. So that'd be something we're chasing.
And maybe just final question: you've outlined a lot of the challenges of being an attack coach, and halfbacks are probably the most crucial element to any attack. And this year you've had injuries to Marcus, George, now Alex. How challenging is that to be? You want as much cohesion as possible, but then you've just not had it in that area.
No, and part of, again, when you're talking about the differences of club and international, that'd be one of you're always on tenterhooks with who's going to be fit and who's not. So your best laid plans can be changed in an instant with players not available. So part of how we adapt and how much cohesion we can create in a week like this, we spend time together. So we're lucky that we've got good nines to come in, and we're lucky that when tens have been injured, we've got a really good crop of tens. So that definitely helps. That thing, the differences in them rather than a drop off.
Okay, that was Richard Wigglesworth chatting to Dan. Really interesting to just hear about some key areas that week in York in particular, but also, Charles, about this relationship between backing data and using that data to improve, which we know it's been a big thing for Steve Borthwick at Leicester in England, but also just kind of, as coaches, just going with their gut and going with what they see and relying on that to make decisions. What do you kind of make of that balance? Because England have been accused in the past by Will Carling, the former England captain, of leaning too heavily on the kind of data, and actually that was before York Week, and then things started to change. So what do you make of that relationship?
Well, I don't think there was necessarily a reaction to what Will Carling said to start off with. I think that victory over Ireland and what happened in the York Week was still massively ground in data, but it is all about the balance. But the eye test and the gut and the instinct, as I'm sure Steve Borthwick would say if he was here, and any head coach and any leader in any walk of life would say, that comes with experience almost, and just there's nothing that can substitute just doing this and coaching and going through these selection meetings, going through training, going through matches. So you have a gut feeling. You can bring in all the data in the world, but the data needs to sort of shape the thinking and not lead the thinking almost. And I think that is what potentially England are getting better at. I mean, I think that, to be honest, they were very good at that at Leicester. You never got the sense at Leicester that necessarily it was coaching by numbers. They used the data really well. Yes, okay, they were very pioneering and they were very innovative with their use of data there, as we've written about lots. But I don't necessarily think that data was king there. I think that always there has to be a human interpretation of it. I suppose it's when almost your back's against the wall, you're under pressure, and you lose sight of maybe a bit of rational thought, rational thinking, that you can potentially lean too much on it, and then that's when it can cloud the thinking, and that's when it can become troublesome. I don't think we're there yet with England. I don't think we necessarily ever have been there yet. I think that you look at Borthwick starting Emmanuel Feo-Boso against Ireland after his cameo off the bench against Scotland.
Yeah.
Probably the data markers there, if you're looking at it, and if you're a conservative coach who's just coaching by numbers, you don't do that. There's an argument even that it could have come sooner, yes, and that maybe Feo-Boso should have started against Scotland, maybe even earlier. But I don't think if you're coaching by numbers, and he's spoken a lot about stability and cohesion and consistency, if you're doing all that with numbers, then I don't necessarily think that those two things add up. So I do think there is a human interpretation, and I do think that, well, and I'm glad of that, because we don't want coaching by numbers.
I think it's important to say that this data isn't to lean on data. It doesn't necessarily have to be a really oppressive thing. The people that are supplying them with the data are aware that there will be a bit of vibes thrown in as well, and a bit of adaptable thinking from the coaches. And the key skill is using that data in a way to inform your game plan, and then actually giving it to the players and motivating the players with a digestible message. And then the other really important point to make is that when we data straitjacket and terms like that, I think are really associated with, well, just kick the ball long and defend. England looked at vulnerability, used data to look at vulnerabilities in Ireland's kick return and in kick return defence, and they put together some really attractive rugby on the back of that, and people didn't really want to give the data credit because it was attractive rugby. Or perceived to be attractive rugby. So, there's a lot at play here, and I think what you're hearing when Richard Wigglesworth talks like that is a coaching team that uses the data quite intelligently, but also with a bit of restraint and trusts themselves too.
Tell us more about the Ireland game. It's almost being put on a slight pedestal, isn't it? As like the game where everything went right, and that's why I think we were all agreed that they could really do with a very good win in the autumn against New Zealand.
I think it's doing a lot of heavy lifting, to be honest, and how we perceive this team. Although, having said that, I think if they'd got over the line in Lyon, that would have been a statement performance. It still was in a way, and so were the two performances in New Zealand, bar those last half hours. Where they were really good, as well as that defensive system really came to the fore against Ireland, but they were fantastic kick returns. So scored 2 tries directly on the second phase after a kick return, with George Verbank either really injecting conviction from the backfield or organising, and he scored the second one, didn't he? But the way the forwards really clicked into shape really, really quickly was really good, and they have actually, in fairness, showed sort of that collective awareness in those situations since. And that is becoming a very identifiable, strong part of their game, and they've just got to build on that.
And before we break down some key kind of positions and selection there, because before the team is announced, there's still a few areas that we're not sure about. Just, Charlie, you've written about England's attack and what you're expecting in this autumn kind of campaign. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit, what you think we'll see?
Yeah, I guess the premise of it is that I don't think there's much of an excuse not to be pretty slick in that area, because that's not the area that's been compromised by a coaching change. Richard Wigglesworth is pretty settled there. The squad in itself is pretty settled, and I expect to see some good kind of efficient, accurate stuff. I think Ollie Chessum's injury is tricky, which means they're not sort of. Well, I would be surprised if they load another hybrid into that starting spot at 6. As Nick Ezekwe would be the option to sort of like for like-ish with Chessum, but I still think they'll have a strong line-out. They look to strike off that line-out. They've tended to load both back rowers and Ellis Genge into midfields, which has been really interesting. They've tended to punch up and then look to play off that, either to play off that or kick off that. I wonder whether they can maybe go wide a little bit quicker. We've mentioned the kick return. I think they'll look at short sides. What always, not to dwell on another sort of significant injury, I think when you look back at the games that Alex Mitchell plays and when he doesn't play, I think that is a big difference for England. I think his, I'm going to use the same word again, but conviction from the base of rucks and just really using that license. He's sort of refined his kicking game, hasn't he, since the World Cup, since going from 4th choice to 1st choice.
Yeah.
And refined his kick.
And kicked amazingly in that semi-final against South Africa.
Amazingly well. Yeah, exactly. But he's always retained this sort of, even in that game, which was tight, and he's retained this sort of license to do what he does for Saints, which is take on those bodyguard defenders.
License to thrill, you might say.
You might say. And I just think that whoever does come in at scrum half will have to use that. Jack Van Portfleet's got probably an underrated running game. We know what Harry Randall can do, and Ben Spencer can turn it on as well when he wants to. But I think they'll have to do that both to keep any impetus England get off kick return and those first phase strike moves, and to work short sides as well.
We asked Borthwick about scrum half, didn't we, the other week, and he was very clear about Mitchell's become the number one, which was interesting. He didn't sort of open. I thought he might kind of play it down a bit and suggest that he'd been very good, but England could fill that gap. But actually, he was quite strong in that. So maybe if we start with scrum half. So do you reckon? Who do you reckon, Charlie, would come in? I'm sort of thinking Van Portfleet, but who would you believe?
Jack Van Portfleet, because you guys were at the presser, wasn't it? Weren't you when he said that he was sure of his first choice?
I asked quite a bungled question of with Harry Mitchell. Harry Mitchell with Alex. Sorry,
who's
Let's
he?
start that again. Harry Randall is where I was going. With Alex Mitchell not being available, and you've got 3 scrum halves in your squad, none of whom have really ever grabbed the jersey. I know Jack Van Portfleet was ruled out for injury. Is it a case of each one has a 0.3 recurring chance of starting against New Zealand, or do you have?
You're still on your question.
Yeah. Or and I actually said 0.3 recurring in the question. Or do you have an outstanding candidate in mind? And he said he knows who his starting scrum half will be. He didn't say who it would be, but he says he knows who it would be, which leads me down maybe the Van Portfleet route, because Randall has not started under Borthwick at all very much. Maybe not. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Certainly not very much, even
maybe
if he has.
Japan game
maybe the Japan game. Yeah, the Japan game. And Ben Spencer has not been necessarily trusted in that role either, and came off the bench in the first test. Didn't necessarily give the best account of himself, and then in the second test he didn't go on the pitch at all. So
that's so informative to me.
Yeah.
Having a 9 go 80 minutes is.
Would you have the bench selection might be even more interesting? Would you have Randall, who's like a tempo changer, can get you back into the game, or do you have Spencer, who is like a closer kind of thing? I guess someone who can sort of manage you over the line. I
think you have to have Randall because Spencer's more similar to Van Portfleet, and I think if you need to change something, if it's all going well, you could keep Van Portfleet on. If he does start Van Portfleet, of course, but you need a sort of a difference there on the bench, I think, and Harry Randall certainly is that. You could have. I mean, we've picked our teams this morning on the website, what we think would start and be the bench on Saturday against New Zealand. I've gone Randall, Finn Smith and Ollie Slightholme on the bench, which I think really could come on and add some zip if England needed a late try or if England needed a few late points.
You've not picked forward at all.
I've not picked forward at all.
That's interesting because I've played it really safe and I've said Spencer forward daily, which I feel is like old heads to get England over the line because they didn't do that in the summer and they missed Ford.
I should add the caveat here of I was assuming that Ford would not be match fit for the All Blacks because he's not played at all, so I just went with the 2 who were match fit. And also I think that Finn Smith is an absolute star, not just for the future but for the present.
Can we jump to outside centre?
Yes.
So to recap, England and Exeter in this new age of friendly, helping everyone out, released Henry Slade. He had 50 minutes on Sunday against Quins. Even the fact that's a Sunday game isn't ideal, is it? Because he's on a shorter week anyway, in terms of he wouldn't have trained yesterday with England when he got back into camp because he'd have rested. So you're in a bit of a race trying to get a guy who had off-season surgery ready for a test against New Zealand. So do you stick with Slade because, as you've said, Charlie, he's very important to that blitz defence, or do you go with Alex Lozowski, who hasn't won a Test cap in 6 years but is playing very well, and the fact he's in the squad in the first place suggests that he's in the mix?
I think Lozowski's a really accomplished, assured operator. What I've done for my team, which I stress I'm picking an England team having not having my mortgage on it. It's not what I'm paid to do, which makes you sort of a bit freer in your selections. But I think what they can do to keep a bit of continuity is slip Tommy Freeman into 13, and I just like what Slightholme brings. I think he he had very, very short cameos, didn't he, in those 2 tests in New Zealand, but frightened the All Blacks with that pace. I just, every time I think of Sevu Reece sort of giving that preview interview where he didn't know who any of the England players were, I laugh at sort of how much he got burned on the outside.
Well, and Tommy Freeman has bit back at that today, saying he wants a bit of sort of get your own back. Well, last night it was on the website, an interview with him about saying how he wants to get his own back on Sevu Reece. I mean, chucking him in at 13 against the All Blacks.
I do think it has to happen at some point, though, just because of his
maybe against
size
Japan,
and his skill set. I would like to see it.
Japan's a safe one.
In this autumn.
He's been there at the back end of games.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Slight home is superb, but I think chucking him in over Lazowski, if you're not picking Slade, would be a massive gamble.
I had Lazowski on the bench because I think he covers 12, 13, 14, 15, 10 at push. He's really super versatile. I just think that, I think that Freeman experiment is going to not be. It's going to be the norm reasonably soon. I do think you lose things with him at 13. I think he's probably has slightly less license to roam, and you sort of mitigate his aerial threat, which is fantastic. But I think that's a really cool way of getting as much pace on the pitch as possible.
The Ollie Chesham injury, which Charlie broke on Saturday, is not, you didn't break Ollie Chesham, but as in broke the news, is a real shame. In terms of what England will do, lock and 6, what are we thinking? I feel like they haven't had a chance to have Chesham and Toje Martin on the field.
No.
Like barely at all.
Well, they did against Ireland.
Yeah. And look how that went.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, blank slate, Martin, Toje Martin, Chesham is your 4, 5, 6. Anything other than Maritoje and George Martin starting in the second round Saturday would be flabbergasting, I think. And at 6, we talk about England's back row depth. It is very deep. They do bat deep. They have got loads of very good flankers who aren't even in the squad. I do think 6 is a little bit of a concern, isn't it?
Because it was Cunningham South in the summer, wasn't it?
And you look at Ollie Chesham. Ollie Chesham is clearly the outstanding, the first choice, who starts at 6. If he's not fit, which he isn't, out for the whole autumn, it's going to be Cunningham South again, who is, don't get me wrong, a fabulous player and ball in hand and in defence and in the loose, he is a real sight to behold. We know that you need a world-class line-out operator at 6 now, and I'm not sure Cunningham South is that yet. That comes again with experience. So who do you pick there? Do you go, as I suggested just before we started, do you just go back to Tom Curry and Sam Underhill and get maybe Ben Earl in the air and Underhill as a fourth jumper? I don't think he'd leave himself that light in the line-out, but then he might just trust Cunningham South. There's obviously Ezekwe, who you've mentioned as well. I mean, 6 is, as I said, a bit troublesome. 7 and 8, not so much.
They've got Curry in the air before. They've got Curry in the air as a third jumper, and Underhill is sort of that fourth. He was actually that. So for the other try that wasn't from kick return against Ireland, he was lifted by Ben Earl, come into line out. It was a really kind of clever inset lift. It was really interesting to talk about 6. So I was actually just WhatsApping Liam Napier, who's a journalist out in New Zealand, and I said, 6 is an interesting actually position for England. And he was going, well, John Cunningham South was fantastic, wasn't he, during the summer, and he is super talented, and he was learning, as you say, he was learning on the job there with that, to sort of round himself out with that line out, those line out kind of skills to go with his carrying and his abrasive defence. But I don't think he's been particularly sharp for Quins at the start of this season. But it might just be that I think it takes quite a lot for Steve Borthwick to sort of switch up the pecking order when he's backed someone. So I think that'd make sense, him going back to Cunningham South.
I mean, they've called in Ted Hill and Alex Coles. Alex Coles has obviously been a mainstay of Borthwick's England squads of late. Got injured, and Ted Hill. I mean, you were there.
I don't think Ted Hill will play, but I've watched him twice in the last 3 weeks, and he's just really good fun. What was interesting with him was that when Bath played at Gloucester on a 4G pitch, they just wanted to have quicker locks, so they moved Ted Hill to number 4, and he had a great game. Look, he's got great athleticism, a great skill set, so certainly he'll be in the mix. I just want to wrap up this section before we get to some questions by just getting your predictions on who will win on Saturday, and a quick word on why, maybe with something on the All Blacks. So Charles, start with you.
I'm going to go England narrowly. I think, but I would not be putting any money on it whatsoever. I don't think I'm going England narrowly, just because of, I think that the two teams are pretty evenly matched, in all honesty, and I think that home advantage and England wanting to avenge what happened in the summer, and the All Blacks on the back of quite a long tour. I think that will all stack against New Zealand. I still think they're a phenomenal side. I just think England narrowly, I think it would mean more to them.
Joe?
I'm the same. Yeah, for those exact reasons, I think home advantage and that desperation factor, having lost those two in New Zealand, is going to be quite significant for England, and them by 3.
To avoid egg on our faces, I'll say New Zealand.
Thanks.
What were you worried about that? I'll say New Zealand, but I'm fascinated by scrum and line-out battle in particular. I'm sure there'll be lots of thrilling tries, but it will be that set piece that decides it.
Yeah, England got taught a lesson, didn't they, at the scrum in the summer? And
Exactly.
They need to shore
So
that up.
interesting to see how they respond and whether England can take advantage. Right, let's get into some of your readers' questions. Thank you as ever for sending them in.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. As a proud sponsor of the WRU, we believe in the importance of grassroots rugby. That begins with the people who are going the extra mile for their local clubs, on and off the pitch. That's why we're partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign. From volunteers to groundsmen, referees to coaches, we want to celebrate the people who are really making a difference and reward them with £5,000 for their club to improve the grassroots game. If you know someone who deserves to be rewarded, we want to hear from you. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to find out more.
Okay, into your questions. The first one from Alexander. He says, what is your opinion on the EPS squad and were there any surprises? He says that he was amazed about Theo Dan getting in and also mentions the lack of tight head, which I know we spoke about in terms of Colin Stewart didn't deserve one, but Theo Dan had one. Charlie, so to recap, 17 elite EPS contracts given out. We initially thought it might be as high as 25, but they've gone with 17. I don't think we've had a chance to ask England why yet.
No.
But we will in the coming days.
Yeah.
What do you make of the group?
They were able to give out as many as 25, right? And
Yeah.
we thought it might be sort of 20, and it's even lower than that, which is quite interesting in
He
itself.
has said that he wanted players to work for them,
Yeah.
and not just be given them.
Right.
I think there are loads of. I think it's very interesting, and they releasing it brings its own concerns of how that sort of plays out among the squad. I'm sure they're very sort of mature, tight knit group, but still, you never know. And the personnel really, really interesting as well. And we also, having not had the chance to ask them yet, I think you can only sort of speculate, but I think there do seem to be a lot of sort of external factors at play, namely who's up for contract in their clubs. So a few of the guy, I think Theo Dan is, which would make sense with Alexander's question of why he would get one, keeping him sort of in the Premiership one, and also at Saracens where he's settled and he's learning off Jamie George and developing gradually. He will have, how many caps has Theo Dan got now? 20 odd?
Yeah, it can't be mine. Can't be many more.
But it's 20 is, that's a player you want to invest in.
All bar one from the bench, or all bar two from the bench.
Yeah. He hasn't had many starts, but he's clearly keen. Borthwick is clearly keen to invest in Theo Dan, and it's easy to see why, really, because he's a super explosive athlete who does offer a lot. And it was a big setback for England that he came on and got concussed, wasn't it, in that second test in New Zealand? So
I'm told it's 12 caps, by the way.
12 caps.
Just to clarify.
But that's still a start that he's made to his Test career, right? And to sort of cast him aside, and I know it's a big step giving him one of those enhanced EPS contracts, but still I think it's something that it's clearly that it wouldn't be a shock if he was in England's plans for the long term.
I mean, 3 10s and 1 prop, Charles, is what has got people raising their pitchforks, but actually that just shows actually where England are kind of lacking like long term and certain quality, doesn't it? Because Ellis Genge is really the only one who kind of made sense from an age and quality profile at this stage.
100%. I mean, I don't think you can criticise the fact that those 3 fly halves and only 1 prop has got an EPS contract. The 3 fly halves are all completely deserving. They will all probably, and fitness and form permitting, be around for the next World Cup. And then you look at the props, and I think everyone knows that there's a bit of a dearth of quality props at the senior level at the minute for England.
Yeah, because the next wave, obviously, are really exciting, aren't they?
Everyone is very excited about, Afo Fasogbon and Asher Opoku Forjor. Obviously, we've written about a lot, and we're very excited. I mean, there's an argument that I don't think they're at EPS contract level yet, but there's an argument that they maybe should be involved in this autumn, maybe in that test against Japan. I mean, I know they're very highly rated by the England management, and they don't want to rush them. They don't want to unnecessarily accelerate their development, basically, because I think they know how valuable and how valuable they can be to the England side. But I mean, you wouldn't at the minute you wouldn't give one to Will Stewart, who's not necessarily starting at tight head, and you probably wouldn't want to give one to Dan Cole either, because for the same reasons as Joe Marler. I mean, they're both excellent. It's amazing that they're still going, but they might not be around for the next World Cup.
And the omission, just before we finish on this, which we were all talking about, was Sam Underhill, who like Henry Slade wasn't at the World Cup, but has sort of come back into the side, started all 8 tests this year. To your point, Charlie, about contract at lengths and kind of expiries, he's not off contract this summer. He signed a 2-year extension with Bath, and he's there until the end of 2026. I just wonder whether that maybe played into the decision as well, in him not being up for one. But also, it's quite a hard one to work out, given he's started all 8 tests this year and actually been quite integral to England.
Really integral, and he's expanded his game. I think he's become more of a jackal threat, as we've mentioned. He's become more prominent at the line out. I think he's more comfortable on the ball than he's ever been. It's a tough one. It's a really tricky one, because I don't think also that he's the age profile where you go and earn a central contract. Because I think he's sort of been there, done that a little bit.
I think we've both picked him out before as like an England captaincy,
genuinely
contender, and it's almost a bit weird that it hasn't happened, because he's such an articulate, well-spoken guy and a fantastic player, like in the top bracket for England. That is an interesting one, and I'm sure one that we'll ask Steve Borthwick about when the time comes this week.
Wasn't in the initial World Cup squad, which always but do you remember
cut in the first wave, was he?
He was in the end recalled to mimic Bottia in training.
And then he played in the fourth playoff against Argentina. Was brilliant. But I remember Ben Earl giving a press conference, and he was shell shocked at Sam Underhill being cut, because Sam Underhill had trained the house down. And actually, egg on my face, I'd asked Steve Borthwick about the previous week who was looking good, and he was raving about Sam Underhill. Yeah,
it's a strange one. On to our next question from Bears Beyond the Gate. At virtually every game, fans are shouting offside at the ruck and bemoaning the lack of intervention by the touch judge. Charlie, are players just constantly offside? Or is in fact play happening too fast for the naked eye of spectators, and are they just believing that people are offside?
I love this question because it breaks me. It absolutely breaks me hearing that, because you're like, oh, offside again. You think it's offside again, do you? Cool. But no, so so I'm speaking on this, this is a while since I did this piece, but 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I went into a referee's day where they just have their regular sort of weekly training, and one of they think about space. So what space does the attacking team have? What space is there behind the offside line? That is one of the key things they're looking at in their review of every game. And one thing that came up was often these defensive lines look offside because they're very well-conditioned athletes, and well-conditioned specifically to accelerating off that line and timing it very well, so that they are going, and they will have a look. They were going as soon as the scrum half picks the ball up and takes it out of the ruck, and they will be conditioned to that specific scrum half they're playing this week. So they will have a look at those scrum half sort of traits from the base.
And they're pushing it to the limit, aren't they? Like they were always going to push it to the limit. They're all, that's every law in sport, not just in rugby, gets pushed to the limit, and that's what that is. And you take your chance.
I mean, fans, please chirp back at me about this, but I'm convinced that some people do just go to games to just have a moan about the ref for the whole thing, and that's their kind of their catharsis. Is just kind of venting for 80 minutes. I always remember one bloke at London Irish who would not stay quiet about every single decision, and it just gets a bit boring, really. And very finally, quick question from Tier 2 Rugby about Japan. Japan's defence, it feels incredibly leaky, Charlie, in terms of just so far this year, and it doesn't bode very well, given that they're going to France and they're going to England. what do we sort of make of the keys there to sort of building success? I know that Eddie Jones is big on trying to add physicality into that pack and athleticism. They've got really athletic players. Maybe it's just a case of bedding in a system as quickly as possible.
Maybe the to be a bit cynical about it, maybe the weather conditions will help up here. Bit trickier to sort of move the ball. What they will get, and I don't think it's unfair to say Tier 2 Rugby sent in the question isn't a massive fan of driving walls and teams sort of overwhelming opponents with a driving wall, but Japan will get a real sort of heavy workout there from both England and France. I do think it's going to be tricky for them. Because I think England are going to come out and try and be super dynamic this November.
Shout out to Warner Dearns, the Japan lock, who just cuts loose and makes big runs. He's great
athlete.
If you don't know much about the Japan team and you're going to that game at Twickenham, look out for the second row. He is great fun. Right, that's all for today. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Charles. Nice to be back. Where are you going to be on the weekend?
Both at Twickenham, aren't we?
We are.
And I will be at Murrayfield for Scotland against Fiji, which is also happening on Saturday, and I assume Scotland will look okay in. I haven't sort of got any kind of major worries about Scotland. Actually, quite excited to see Scotland after their summer of travelling around the Americas and taking loads of players.
Carl Rowe on fire.
Yes, he's great fun.
No Finn, I don't think, because it's outside the window.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. But that's not a bad thing, because they're blooding 10s, and it's a good chance to get a look at Tom Jordan, isn't it, from Glasgow?
Jordan, the Glasgow fly half.
Which could be good. So yeah, I'll report back from Scotland with lots of detail, I promise. Please keep up with everything on the Telegraph website, building up to the awesome internationals this weekend. There's lots of columns from Brian Moore and Will Greenwood and Gavin Mayers, and all of our match previews as well. And we'll be back to reflect on England against the All Blacks and Scotland-Fiji next week. So enjoy the games, have a good weekend, and until then, goodbye.
Go.compare sponsors the Telegraph Rugby Podcast. At Go.compare, we are pleased to be partnering with the Telegraph Media Group to launch the Making a Difference campaign, recognising the individuals who are going the extra mile at grassroots rugby clubs across Great Britain. Go to telegraph.co.uk/making a difference to nominate a grassroots hero who could win £5,000 for their club, as well as hints and tips from our insurance experts at Go.compare.